Welcome, everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. Just checking. Good. Fantastic to have you all here. My name is Lisa Fischer. I work for ECG. We're a climate change think tank, and I head up our energy work. It's a pleasure to be here and to be discussing with you today on a really unseasonably sunny day, I would say, what we need to do next to unleash the potential of solar and connect it to the grid as fast as possible. We have in the US and Europe around 1 terawatt of solar waiting to be connected. And just to put that into perspective, and I know some of you here are also working in the international context, we're talking about an 11 terawatt capacity target globally for 2030 for all renewables at the moment. So that's a massive chunk that we can advance if only we manage to bring it onto the grid. And the good news is some of the work that will be presented today means we have all the solutions needed. We just need to really line up the ducks in a row that really, in a system that works. And that's what we're here to discuss today and really find also quick entry points, landing points on the European agenda to advance this. So first of all, thanks to both Eurelectric and SolarPower Europe for putting together this event, and particularly to MEP Maria Carvalho for hosting this event here in the European Parliament. So I'm not going to say much more. The one thing I want to say, just give you an overview of what's going to happen. So we're going to have a few opening remarks in a second. Then we'll get the analysis that Eurelectric and SolarPower Europe have done presented by Louise and Naomi. And then we'll have roughly around 45 minutes, an hour for a panel. So do get your questions ready. This is then your chance to also challenge everyone here and ask questions. And there we really want to talk about how we're going to land some of those solutions proposed in the European agenda. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Kristian from Eurelectric.
Thank you, Lisa. In Eurelectric, we talk a lot about security of supply these days. Might not have been the first thing you'd think of when we talk solar connection. And probably that's because for many years, security of supply was some kind of code language, which meant don't do anything. You're going to disturb security of supply. Well, that's changed a lot. And the energy transition is by now a very broad consensus. We have a law for climate neutrality. We're all headed there. And we know that doubling down on decarbonization means doubling up, at the very least, on electricity, tripling up on renewables, some people say. And by mid-century, we should have at least some 60% of electricity in total final energy consumption. At the same time, the backdrop of the energy transition has changed very radically over the last year and a half. War in Ukraine, increasing geopolitical tension, increasing manifestation of extreme weather, increasing, I would say, crisis and to some extent chaos in the world. So a less secure world and a lot more strain on our energy supply, which forces us to pose the question, how do we ensure security of supply in the age of net zero? Now, back in the day, so that's essentially why, that's the reason why we talk a lot about security of supply these days. But of course, it needs to be in a new context, on a new backdrop, taking into account the direction we're headed towards, fixing the climate and creating a more resilient energy system. So the notion of security of supply has changed a lot since we had those debates 10, 15 years ago. And today, clean, resilient, affordable, and reliable electricity are a key part of security of supply for all of us and for Europe as a continent and an economy. I've heard that if you came to the Brussels bubble some 10, 15 years ago, you'd hear people from the electricity industry say that some 10% of variable renewables in the system would basically mean that the system would break down and hence be a huge liability for security supply. Today, it's the other way around. Today, we're saying solar and grids that connect the solar are a critical key element of security supply. That's not to say it's going to be easy, and this is the background for this cooperation that we have. It's going to be quite challenging in many ways. We're looking at 6 years ahead where we need to deploy some 600 gigawatts of renewables to reach the targets. This is an unprecedented challenge. A lot of those 600 gigawatts are going to be solar. They're going to be connected to another part of the grid than the traditional power plants that we used to connect. They're going to be connected to the medium and low voltage grids. And that requires a completely different approach to how we operate the system, how we regulate the system, and also how we cooperate with each other to make all this happen. And this is exactly what this report analysis is about, solar connection. How do we do this together now? Just to close up and to kind of illustrate how different the system is, one of the biggest grid operators in Europe, I sat with the CEO of one of the biggest grid operators in Europe, and he said, by 2030, we're not going to be a DSO, we're going to be a CSO. So DSO is a distribution system operator. A CSO is a collection system operator, because essentially what the DSOs are going to do by then is to collect electricity from thousands and thousands of decentralized plants. So a completely different approach. And this is essentially what we explore in this report. What does it take to go from a DSO to a CSO to connect hundreds of gigawatts of solar in a very limited time period? So this is the challenge, but also the opportunity. And I want to say a big thank you to SolarPower Europe for this cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristian. And as a member of or an employee of a civil society organization, I might register the patent on CSO in a second. But I think that spirit is exactly right. We need to go from network operation and running networks to really running systems and focusing on data and making use of that. You outline a lot the why we need to do this as well. And I also just wanted to highlight citizens have been choosing solar. Those who can afford it and have access and can connect have been choosing solar en masse. So the question now, Maria Carvalho, for you is how you've been working very hard over the past few years in the European Parliament on solar, on DSO flexibility, on market design. Where have we got to? What's missing? What's next in terms of implementation and regulatory design?
Thank you, Lisa. First of all, I want to thank the co-organizers of this event, Eurelectric and SolarPower Europe, to have chosen me as co-host. You have done the work. Just to welcome you and just making you in the European Parliament. And want to welcome all of you to the European Parliament today. We are in the middle of a week that is a very important week for the Parliament, is where we receive the regions and the mayors all over Europe of the 27 member states. So you can see a lot of people in the corridors. Not all are MEP and staff. There is a lot of visitors from the regions. And so it's a very interesting week to visit the Parliament. I'm very pleased to be here, and I'm very pleased that to be associated when you are disseminating these solar connection key outcomes. I actually am, or I was, I'm still a professor on energy and in the University of Lisbon. And always I tell to my students that it's systems. We have a systemic approach always in engineering, and special on energy. So I like this idea that you have put forward. And I also congratulate Solar Power Europe for the outcomes and touching the points that are so important, like the grid connection, the network plan, the network investment, and the solar flexibility models. And all of these are very dear to me, and you can find it in the reports that I've been working. I take also this opportunity to thank both institutions for the support, especially in my last two reports that are still going on, that are the package of the electricity market design. So it's the electricity market design and the remit, where I think that is a very nice outcome. We have the compromise of the Parliament. In the case of remit, we have also the position of the Council, all your ideas are reflected in the electricity market design. So we have a very nice consensus between 4 political groups in the European Parliament. It was not easy, as probably most of you have followed, but we have mainly 3 points that for me are very important and are very clearly there. One is the right signals for investment, and not only investments in production, renewable production, but also on anything related with grids, networks. Is one of the weak points that we have at the moment is the framework for investment, and we have pushed this in the EMD report. So we managed to get rid of all the barriers to the investment. There were some amendments with some barriers. It took a little bit of time, but we got rid of all of them. So we have a nice framework for attracting public and private, mainly private investment to Europe in the area of electricity. We also have a full internal market, electricity internal market, in terms of not divided into regions. So we have a technological neutral, but also geographical neutral approach to Europe. Is very important that we consolidate the internal market. And on the third point is the consumers. We have put a very important priority to the consumers' empowerment, energy sharing, energy communities, but also on the protection. So in times of a crisis, we have a criteria for crisis, and there is special protection for all the consumers, special attention to the most vulnerable, but all the consumers are considered individual, the families, and also the industry, the enterprises. But also in normal times, we give a lot of flexibility to the choice of contracts, to have several meters. Some points the companies do not like so much, but is an equilibrium between the different parts of protecting the consumers and the requests and the important things for the economy and for the electricity producers. We have included a lot and enlarged the flexibility. As I told you, we were more ambitious than the Commission in terms of energy sharing, energy communities. And we think that is the right approach that we managed to achieve, and we look forward very much that the Council arrives to an agreement. There is an important meeting on the 17th of this month. We have a lot of hope that the Council will finalize their general approach so that we can start the negotiations. And I would like to ask you if you have, and you have, influence in your member states, try to push your governments to get into an agreement, because otherwise we can miss this opportunity to modernize our electricity market design. Because after these elections, and we don't know what will happen in the future, it will fall, and there will be a new proposal, a new parliament, a new commission. So who knows what can happen afterwards? So We should not miss this opportunity to have a more modern that protects better the people, that is more prepared for crisis, and also to attract investment. So it's a message that I pass to you, that you should pass always in your where you participate in public debates and public events. On the remit, very short, in the remit, we have increased the transparency, we have get rid of some bureaucracy, and we have increased the European dimension. So on the balance of powers between national regulators and the European ACER, the European regulators, we have given some more powers to ACER, but as I said, we are now negotiating because the Council has found an agreement in REMIT. We are negotiating to the member states, so let's see what is the final point. Usually the Council is more pro giving more powers to the national, so we will find a mid-term of equilibrium, like always in these things in Europe. To conclude, I want to tell you that on the 20th of October, so Friday a week, we have a very nice conference in Lisbon, in a very nice town, my hometown, on the electricity market design. So the ones that are close to Lisbon or they want to go to visit Lisbon, we will discuss. Is an international conference, is one day. The president of Eurelectric will participate, like many other companies, electricity companies, and also the consumers, also the regulators, the grid managers, so mayors, people that are developing energy communities. So it's going to be a very interesting discussion at the point. I hope that at 20 we have already the position of the Council, so it's in the beginning of the negotiation, so it will be a very fruitful discussion. So we will have, if you want to participate, just send me an email and we will register you and send you the proper invitation and the program. So I wish you all a very fruitful conference, a good discussion today, and thank you again for inviting me to host you.
Thank you very much, Maria Carvalho. And you've all heard 2 invites, and the Lisbon one definitely sounds very attractive. Perhaps one quick follow-up question. Assuming that we manage to close off the market design and the remit, is there anything that's on your mind of like, what's the next thing that needs to be done that you'd like to share?
Implementation. Because we, looking at the previous package, is still not fully implemented by the member states. So we can have a very nice electricity market design, a very nice regulation. If it's not implemented by the member states, it doesn't mean anything. For example, I give you the case of the energy communities. Is something that already foreseen in the existing electricity market design. We have legislation, for example, in my own country, but the difficulties are so huge that there are few cases, and they get a lot of barriers, a lot of difficulties. I was recently in Croatia. They are still waiting for the implementation. They want to, in a conference, in the energy conference, there were promoters that want to start doing these energy communities, and still there is no national legislation. And they are now doing it, but at the time that they are doing it, a new legislation will come out, that is the revision of the EMD. So the member states need to be fast to transpose all the legislation and also to apply, because someone was counting the number of months until 2030. I forgot the number, but are not a lot. 75 or so. So in 75 months, you need to have so many things in place. Investments in grids, investments in renewables, changing the transport system, decarbonizing your industry, partially decarbonizing your agriculture. So I don't know how we can do all that at the same time in such a short time.
Thank you, Maria Carvalho, and hopefully we can pick up implementation as part of the panel and the support infrastructures needed to do that. Thank you again for hosting, and also good luck for the discussions in October. I would like to now invite Louise Rouillot and Naomi Chevilla on stage to present the analysis. Over to you. So, yes, thanks a lot, and welcome everyone to this event. I think we'll have the slides shortly put on the screen. My name is Naomi Chevilla. I'm Head of Regulatory Affairs at SolarPower Europe.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Louise Rouillot. I'm the Head of the Distribution Team at Eurelectric. So, the slides are coming. They're coming soon. So I was going to show you a bit of a context slide to explain a bit where we're here and to give you an idea of the solar revolution that we're acknowledging. The solar market has grown tremendously in the past years. Last year, we installed 41 gigawatts of solar PV. And I might make this work. No. Yes, great. So if you look at the left, so these are the figures from our our global market outlook for solar power running from 2022 to 2027 for Europe. And you see that last year we reached 208 gigawatts installed, so a growth of 41%. With actually a bit more than 50% rooftop PV. The solar market is a very fragmented market with small rooftop, large rooftop, and ground-mounted. What 41 gigawatts represent, it's a 40% growth year on year for the second year in a row. So every year we increase the market by 40% with all of the impact that it gives on the solar supply chain and in the administration. And in fact, we will grow, and we need to grow even more. By 2030, the Commission has put to the solar industry the objective of growing of having a capacity installed of 600 gigawatts AC, which is translated into 750 gigawatts DC, the metric that we use in the solar sector as part of the Repower EU strategy and of our energy independence strategy from following the war in Ukraine. We're on track. We actually think we can grow bigger, and that the market will reach more than 900 gigawatts by 2030. So that's the scale of the challenge we're talking about. So thanks, Naomi. I think Naomi has been pretty clear. So as we see, moving to the. Yeah, I see. So as I see, so Naomi has been pretty clear, as the entire system is clearly growing, notably driven by an exponential PV growth. So the grid needs to grow accordingly, notably to host this additional RES capacity. And so the associated investment and operational costs. And at Eurelectric, we have estimated that for this decade, meaning until 2030, we need roughly 38 billion per year to make the grid fit for the energy transition. And these volumes of investment will increase up to 100 billion per year by 2050,
notably due to the acceleration of the electrification. So this is really a massive investment challenge. And where does this money go? So we can try to have three categories of cost. The first cost for this investment is related to hardware infrastructure. It's line, cables, substations. And as you can see on those slides, well, there is an investment, but not sufficient to follow the pace for the expansion needed for integrating RES capacity. Second categories of cost is about purchase of technologies that are needed to make the grid flexible, dynamic, and smarter. And the third categories of cost is about getting the right expertise, right expert resources that are actually central and complementary for the two first categories. So there is a gigantic challenge in terms of integrating volumes into the grid. And this is being coupled with a race against time. Each DSOs in Europe are facing an increasing numbers of connection requests. They have to address them. And what we see at the same time is that it takes time, especially to build new capacity. So for instance, if I want to install a solar PV on my roof, especially in an area which is pretty congested, it's quite likely that there will be a need to reinforce the grid and notably to build a line at low voltage level. And as you can see on these slides, it takes almost a year. And the reason why is that it's mostly due to very lengthy planning and permitting. So we need to find some solutions to fast track this build out.
Yes, and in this race against time, flexibility is even more important. We need flexibility in the electricity system, but it's even more important because we have this issue of time to develop the grid. What do we mean by flexibility? Flexibility is the ability of increasing or decreasing consumption or production to adapt to system stress. So, for example, the system lacks electricity. I discharge my battery to provide electricity to the system. There are different needs of flexibility. There is short-term flexibility, long-term flexibility to adapt to seasonal needs. There is flexibility that we use for balancing, and there is flexibility that needs to be localized at certain areas of the grid. Flexibility is everywhere. You can see, so we think of a hydro, of a large battery storage, but it's also the smart inverter that is located with your solar PV system that can modulate the electricity sent to the system. It's the smart EV charger, which modulates the charging of the vehicle to adapt to the system. And it's the smart home that will control maybe your laundry machine or your battery, again, to adapt to price signals. So we need flexibility in the future. Just to give you an idea of the volumes, the JRC released a study showing that we need to double the amount of flexibility resources by 2030 and to multiply this number by 7 by 2050. SolarPower Europe did an estimate of what would that represent in terms of storage capacity, looking at the exercise that were done at national level. And we find that we need to have at least 200 gigawatts of storage. Where are we now compared to that objective? Well, you see the figures on the slide. In the last 2 years, we've installed a couple of gigawatts of battery storage. That's without pump hydro. And overall, this should bring us to a capacity of storage at 129 gigawatts in 2030 of storage without pump hydro. So that's not enough. It's well below what we need, and we need to act to reach that objective.
So we spent some minutes with Naomi to explain and to depict a bit the important issues that are affecting both the solar industry but also the DSO community. And almost a year ago, SolarPower Europe and Eurelectric has decided to team up together to find solutions to address those challenges and to be a bit solution-oriented and to identify concrete recommendations that policymakers can quickly activate. We believe that there is a massive challenge for us. We have took the right decision in the past, and now we need to implement them in the right way. To do so, what we have actually, so today now, and what we are going to focus now in the next part of this presentation with Naomi is to, and that's an honor for us, is to present the conclusions of the work being done and led by over 100 experts from both the DSO community and the solar industry.
So we wanted to give you an idea of what we're talking about, because the grid is a lot of things. And we looked at different elements. So the first one was network planning. The network planning is a planning moment orchestrated by the DSO, which lasts 2 to 3 years, where the DSO starts to look at the evolution of consumption and generation based on technology roadmaps, based on demography. Based on that, the DSO models the electricity systems, identifies the infrastructure needs, and then decides on a list of projects which needs to be invested in. Or at that moment, he could also decide to develop a flexibility framework to unlock new sources of flexibility. Then we decided to zoom on the grid connection request. So basically, what happens when a solar developer wants to connect to the grid? First, the solar developer has to understand the rules, understand what's the process, who he has to talk to, purchase certified equipment that is recognized by the grid operator, then submit the request and go through a classic administrative process until the connection is finalized. The last step in the grid environment is, of course, operational time, which in fact happens continuously, even as we speak. It's during this operational time that price signals are triggered. So, for example, local flexibility markets, time of use tariffs, and during which DSOs can also take operational decisions in case security limits are surpassed. So that's for the referential, and now we'll present the recommendations on network development, grid connection, and flexibility.
So let's deep dive in the network planning and investments. So Naomi just explained, a network planning is a tool for system operators. And the primary objective is really to try to identify the evolution of the system and try to identify where they should, for instance, build new capacity, better optimize some areas. And it's a very strategic document for them because it's also a way to take the right decision in terms of investment. So it's a guiding document, but it's also a very important document for project developers, for generators, because it includes a lot of strategic information where they should better, for instance, locate their project. If it's congested here, maybe I should avoid. If it's actually here less congested, maybe I will have a fast track access to the grid. So if it's properly implemented, but also properly communicated to stakeholders, the network plans can then help the DSO doing better grid capacity management, and for the generators have a fast track and also optimized location. But where do we start? So as the title shows on these slides, we need what we call a forward-looking mindset. What does it mean? It means that we should not wait, for instance, to get a connection request to start looking and investigated whether we can actually rightly connect the project here. We should try to look a bit longer term, 5 to 10 years at least, in the network planning. And this network planning should also encompass long-term scenarios by 2050. And they should be also very well connected and correlated to also the national energy planning, like the NECPs. So those plans also need to integrate not only the capacity built out, because there are also solutions for grids. It's also, for instance, the flexibility potential. Those network planning needs to integrate and map the flexibility potential. And if I have to conclude with one thing, is that the network planning, as I said, is very important for driving investment decision. And the investment should also be much more anticipatory for DSOs. At the moment, we have the tendency to strongly focus on CapEx, but actually OpEx can also play a key role, especially notably for unlocking the flexibility. So it's very important that we consider both. And the second thing is that we should make sure that at national level, remove any obstacles that prevent doing an anticipatory approach for investments. So that is a bit our two main points with regard to investment and network planning. Now we can maybe move on.
Yes, so when we look at the grid connection, so again, a representation of the grid connection, 4 recommendations. The first one is to clarify and harmonize the grid connection rules. What do we mean by that? First, we don't always have a clear idea of what are the grid connection rules at national level. So it's important that national governments clarify what's the process, what are the responsibilities, and most importantly, what are the timelines, and then develop a sort of accountability for those timelines. The second issue with the rules is that the grid connection rules remain quite different across countries. We've managed to harmonize them for large projects, but they remain quite different for small projects and for solar PV clusters, but also for EV chargers. The rules can differ significantly, and it's important to harmonize. Second, it's digitalization. So what do we mean by that? One, having access ex ante to the grid connection map, but also being able to file a grid connection request through a digital process, a ticketing system that then allows you to monitor the status of your request. Third, when grid reinforcement is decided, make sure that the permitting of that line can be streamlined. This means fast-track procedures. This means also political support to make sure that the permitting can be delivered. And fourth, the rules need to be improved for a hybrid project. So what do we call hybrid projects? It's solar coupled with another technology, mostly solar and storage. We still have undefined processes or burdensome processes that need to be clarified and streamlined to develop those technologies.
And then our last set of recommendations is about flexibility potential. As Naomi explained, flexibility can play a key role, especially because we know that building new capacity will take time. So we need to get the most of the existing infrastructure. And one way is notably to optimize, to try from the distributed energy resources to play with the flexibility that they can provide back to the system. Especially in the system of the future, where we know that at least 42.5% of the energy mix will be composed by renewables. So the first thing to do is to map where is the flexibility. And it's a task that is assigned to system operators and are currently under discussions in the market design to identify the flexibility compared to other kind of solutions, and then to bring that to national level, notably what we call at the moment targets. And this is a way to incentivize the use of flexibility. A special point of attention is about the regulatory sandboxing that we could set up, especially for prosumers and active customers. We know that they are playing being much more, and that's the reason why there are very relevant stakeholders that needs to be taken into account in the planning. Then, when we look at, we have identified and seen where the flexibility is, we need to see what kind of tool of flexibility do we have. The first one is at the moment of the connection. It's called flexible connection agreement. Flexible connection agreement, it's the opportunity for a consumer to decide to notably limit his capacity to be connected to the grid and as a counterpart, he will not have to pay then the cost of expanding the grid. So it's a sort of attractive way to get access to the grid in a faster way, in a cheaper way. And for the system operators, it's a way also to better manage and to provide this flexibility back to the system. The second way to provide grid capacity, it's more in the operational phases. It's two-way. Either it's explicit, it's via local flexibility markets, and at the moment there's an ongoing discussions to define rules at European level within the network codes. It's an intense work. And then the third way, it's more implicit, it's via the dynamic tariff, times of use tariff, notably. So there's a lot of varieties of tools, and the question is rather, how can we incentivize the use of them? And it's where we have maybe the major bottleneck is pushing regulators to allow the system operators to for instance, procure flexibility services. At the moment, they do not really consider flexibility services as one of the possible options for managing the grid. And one way could be, for instance, to get some financial bonuses with KPI. That could be one of the options to push system operators to consider flexibility for managing their grids.
So to wrap up, without the slides, but we don't need the slides, five short points. First one, you talked about the mindset. It's important to change the mindset. We build the grid for the security of supply of consumers, and now the security of supply of consumers depends on deploying enough renewables and enough clean flexibility. We need that mindset to be streamlined among grid operators. The second point is governance. Our problems now are located at a too granular level that the Tier 1 NDP has difficulties to reach. So we need a new governance system with key indicators, and we need to understand if the clean energy package and the provisions taken at EU level have been implemented. 3, it's digitalization. It's important to digitalize procedures. We're going through the same hurdles for permitting of renewables, and undoubtedly other public service infrastructure are going through the same type of challenges, and solutions could be taken there. 4, it's flexibility. We need to streamline flexibility throughout grid planning and at all the stages of grid operation. And 5, I think, is an important point, is allow and encourage technology and regulatory innovation. We have new challenges we need to adapt also in practices. And so giving output-based incentives to regulators and to system operators is very important, as well as allowing regulatory sandboxing, regulatory innovation. With that, we thank you for your attention, and we leave the floor to Lisa for the panel.
Thank you, Louise and Naomi. And I think it's coming together, and we've got the market design framework, hopefully, that will provide that push for member states to really talk about flexibility needs and potential. We have a plan just now presented, what needs to happen to really align the ducks in a row to make it easy for system operators to do flexibility, to connect solar to the grid. And as Kristian outlined in the beginning, it's a cultural shift as well at system operator level that we need. It's a cultural shift from CapEx focus to also looking at OpEx, from thinking about expansion, but also modernization and digitization. And in particular, it's a cultural shift on what we've just heard. What is energy security? Is it building pipelines and pylons, or is it also how we operate the grid and how we run the grid? Without further ado, Kerstin Jorna has just joined us from Director General at DG Grow. He's going to share some remarks with us. Kerstin, you've just dropped in, but we've just heard a story of remarkable growth on solar, hello, Kerstin. Remarkable growth on solar, and that we need to scale even further going to 2030. How are you looking at it on the supply chain side? So it's not only the actual capacity and networks, it's also the supply chain, the skills, the labor behind that. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. And thank you, Eurelectric and SolarPower, for a very interesting report, as well as Mrs. Graça Carvalho for hosting today's discussion. Achieving the green objectives of our Green Deal requires a holistic approach. And it's not, as you said, only looking at the energy system or only looking at industry. We need to bring this together, and we need to look at deployment and manufacturing upstream and downstream. This was the reason, actually, we changed the organization of DG Grow to make it, around ecosystems and to capture and understand better the value chains. And this kind of new knowledge that we acquire as well about how value chains are functioning across the single market. In fact, they're irrigating the single market economy. This is very, very timely knowledge for helping and accompanying the transition of our industry to green and digital transition. It means, in essence, that 24 million companies have to take investment decisions now about their future business models. when it comes to these business models, they have one thing in common, or these business cases, it's they all need energy. And they need green, affordable, abundant energy at the factory gate. That's the challenge. And the war of aggression in Ukraine and the fallout of this when it comes to energy has shown how much we need to accelerate actually our energy transition. With the share of renewables in the electricity mix is set for 2030, we need clear and fast permitting procedures, we need grid integration issues, we need to solve supply bottlenecks, and we cannot afford to waste renewable energy, which is happening at the moment in many countries, because the grid can't take it. There is, of course, Repower EU, which is about ultra-fast deployment. There are our proposals on renewables, electricity market design, hydrogen and gas, and they all seek to accelerate in a coordinated fashion, because that's important for investors as well, the transition of the decarbonization of our energy system. A more integrated energy system, increased investments by companies and public authorities into renewable energy sources, energy storage, hydrogen, grids and industrial transformation, all of that is pivotal, and all of this has to happen more or less at the same time. We cannot have a kind of millefeuille approach. And you address it actually in the report that has just been presented. Now, what about, how does the sun come into all of this? Our Repower plan aims for over 320 gigawatt of solar voltaic to be newly installed by 2025, and which is twice today's level, and almost 600 gigawatt by 2030. It's huge, also in terms of investment. And investment means risk taking. And today I was in an angel investor summit this morning, risk taking against a background of increased interest rates, higher capital cost, more innovative solutions which haven't been market tested. I mean, we're talking about big risk taking here. In 2022, Europe installed a record 46 gigawatt of solar power. That's half more of what we did the year before. So we're on track. But it also comes with industrial challenges. And that's where I really want to focus on a bit, because the faster we deploy, the faster we have to manufacture. If we don't keep that kind of pas de deux, it means that we will have to import from somewhere. It means we will be dependent, so no longer dependent on Russia for gas, but dependent on somewhere else for solar panels. And as you know, the somewhere else is China, where we import for the moment almost exclusively solar panels that we need. And that's where our industrial policy, the Green Deal Industrial Plan, and the Net Zero Industry Act come in. With the Net Zero Industry Act, which is a pretty innovative piece of legislation, because we do not start from a systemic point of view, you know, this is what we want to regulate, the scope, but we started from the business case. So if you have a business case of manufacturing, let's say, solar panels, or anywhere in the solar panel value chain, then you need access to land, you need access to finance, you need access to skills, and you need access to markets for the product. So we looked at these four really milestones in a business case and tried to facilitate this. On permitting, we did a review of all the permitting procedures in the member states. It takes years to decades in many cases. So we held up the picture, this mirror to the member states, and said, do you think that's good enough? With that, we created a momentum to make, in fact, our proposals, which are pretty radical. And it's the first time ever we actually go into member states' procedures and legislate. Because before, the adage was EU legislates, member states implement, and then whatever, they did whatever, kind of. So on the permitting, we're now, for the clean technologies that we're aiming at, we're saying it's, the delays, fixed delay in months, not years or decades. One-stop shop, you can have, for some countries we found like 30 more authorities with a tiny veto right on a tiny part of the project. But, if you didn't have all 30 of them, you didn't have your project and your investor would walk away. After 10 years, I would also walk away. So we said one-stop shop, one decision. You may have others in the process, but that's back office, doesn't concern the company. All digital, and upfront, the company needs to know what documents are required. You cannot come back after 10 years or 2 or 4 and say, by the way, I forgot, you should have shown me that certificate or that's whatever, and we have to start the process again. So that's pretty radical, and I really hope the Parliament will support us in this radical approach, because obviously member states, even if the industry ministries are very willing, when it comes to local, regional authorities, people kind of fearing they lose their say or their chair, or they push back. So we need help to go through. Another point where also which the report mentions, and I find very important, is about the regulatory sandboxes. We're talking about innovative solutions. Now, future customers or investors, they say, looks like a great idea, but how do I know that it works? And then you say, yeah, and there are these rules. So with these sandboxes, we want to help to reduce the risk from both a customer and an investor point of view, to show that this innovation, that new solution actually works, and that it would work within a certain regulatory environment. Or if it doesn't, that, then there are ways to discuss whether there could be a kind of more flexible regulatory environment. It reduces risk, and it helps to scale up innovation. I'd also like to say a word about the Critical Raw Materials Act, because if you really look at the manufacturing chain, then you cannot stop, at the manufacturing, because any business case also needs inputs. So, and these inputs are raw materials. And in the Critical Raw Materials Act, we make sure that when there's a big dependency on certain raw materials, batteries, graphite, for example, at the moment, gallium and germanium for chips, and also solar panels to some extent. So these, if we can't have these, we can forget kind of about the whole rest. And that's why we also have the Critical Raw Materials Act, which is similarly radical in the approach: access to land, access to finance, access to skills, and access to market. So the way ahead, we think over and above having the right regulatory framework, we need more. We need to really accompany and push the process. That's why we created the EU Solar PV Industry Alliance, which is now already counting 130 members, and is working to reach, by developing the project pipelines, the objective of 30 gigawatt of European manufacturing capacity by 2025. These collaborations, we have other areas, batteries, raw materials, hydrogen. These alliances, they are new formats of public-private collaboration in a period where you really need to do what Europe is best is collaborate. We're also preparing the eco-design rules for PV modules and inverters, which will define the standard of green and sustainable modules and inverters in Europe and what can be sold in Europe. Again, from a company point of view, that addresses the market risk, because if the regulation, if I can produce the solar panel that that regulation frames, I know I have a market. There's also the skills gap, and that came up this morning also with the angel investors. There's a terrible skills gap across clean technologies. We are working on a solar academy to actually train people, and they may be engineers or workers that do combustion engines today, to give them a perspective, to train them to be part of the solar PV value chain. And we are looking at the needs for 50,000 new workers in this, skilled workers in this area. Then, of course, financing, access to finance. There's a lot of public finance around. If you look at the Recovery and Resilience Facility, if you look at the state aid programs of the member states, so that's public de-risking, then there's also our EU budget. And then private money also available. But from a company point of view, often it's difficult. How does this come together? And what we are trying to do is to move this, how do all these different sources come together, to move that into a back office and allow for the companies just to come with their project. The proposal we made in this is called STEP. STEP because it's not a fully fledged sovereignty fund, but it's a step towards this. And one feature of this, apart from, I mean, there's of course a feature also additional money, but I'm not so sure we'll be able to get that. But one feature of it is actually to see how we can bring together the different sources in the EU of financing and in the member states around how we can blend around one project, and to make it easier for the companies rather than knock on, I don't know, 15 doors, just to knock on one and then help the company to bring the different funds together. Because in a project, you have different risks. And that means you also need different de-risking tools. If you need equity, that's something else than from meeting loans. If you're a startup, you know, nobody will give you a loan because you only have an idea that you believe in. But that's why you need equity. But as you grow, the loans will do, and then it's a question of also guarantees. So we have different instruments, and member states have different instruments, and they should come together. Access to the market, let me say a word on this. We want to look at public procurement, because public procurement, this is 14% of our GDP. And there are many, many towns, regions that will have to renovation wave buildings, public buildings. They will want to install solar panels on schools, on hospitals. They will also be looking for electric buses. They will be looking at wind energy for decarbonizing the energy system. So heat pumps, and we are looking in Net Zero Industry Act, but also in Critical Raw Materials Act, we're looking at how we can frame the public spending and the proposals for public spending to include criteria about sustainability and resilience. Again, this is something that is not so much done. It has been possible under our regulations, but it has not been done so much. So we are trying to promote this through Net Zero Industry Act, and that again creates market certainty for companies that have innovative solutions in this area. So this is the industrial dimension to the decarbonization of the energy system. It's the industrial dimension very much geared also to the solar industry, and I think we just have to get these gigawatts installed. That's the compass. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kerstin. Thank you, Kerstin. 1 second. I'm going to invite the panel to come up and join me already. But in the meantime, one quick follow-up question, very briefly. You mentioned sort of the pressures, inflation, capital costs. You mentioned a few things that are being done around that. But what are some of the quick fixes the European Commission is looking at in that area? And also related to that, there is enormous regional differences inside Europe as well on access to capital costs. How are you thinking about that? And please, panel, come up in the meantime.
The differences in Europe, I mean, if you look at net zero, at the Recovery and Resilience Facility, in fact, all member states have meaningful amounts of money, and they have, and 37% of it is for climate purposes, so that, you know, there's a kind of earmarking. Quick fixes, I think, is really in the collaboration, and we've seen it in, for example, the Hydrogen Alliance, which has generated an important project pipeline quite quickly, which then has helped to focus member states' contributions to this. And again, from the single market point of view, these, when member states were together in the projects of common interest, then there is also an integration effect. I mean, it's part of they all work together on the same value chain. And this is not super quick fix, but now I'm not Harry Potter either. So it's in the collaboration that we can advance quickly.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I'm welcoming, please come over. I'm working on my right, Joachim Balke, head of unit in DGNA on infrastructure, Sean Kelly, MEP, Walburga, Hemetsberger, CEO of SolarPower Europe, and we've already met Kristian. So thank you very much. You've all heard the previous contribution. So we're going to kick off with a quick fire round. Just getting your reactions. What's the sort of key takeaway? What surprised you in what's been presented earlier and discussed? Or is there anything you think has been missing from the presentation on how we're getting this solar pipeline online very quickly? Sean, I'm going to start with you and then.
Well, sorry, I was at other meetings, so I didn't hear most of the presentations. But I think obviously including stakeholders was mentioned towards the end, which is vital. Because if we do not have everybody involved together and moving forward with a clear policy and clear supports, then we're not going to achieve what we can. But it's absolutely a wonderful opportunity which must be grasped, and we do it collectively, linking all stakeholders and across the entire European Union.
Thank you, and that clarity of direction is particularly important. Joachim.
Thanks, thanks a lot. First of all, thanks a lot for having me and for the presentation of this report, which I thought is really extremely helpful and timely. I think it's also an excellent sign that it's been written together by Eurelectric and SolarPower Europe, which is perhaps sort of an obvious thing to do today, but you know, I've come here to the Brussels bubble 22 years ago, and I think in the meantime, you know, it's good to see how things have grown together also in terms of the stakeholders, and I think it's very good that you present this as a common report. In terms of the content, I think one thing that continues to, I wouldn't say worry me, but which I think is the, you know, the key difficulty which we'll have to deal with. It came out very clearly from one of the first slides that you were showing on the timelines, basically, that you need for these individual types of infrastructure. So, I mean, 1 year for a simple connection, but 7, 8 years or more, you know, for a bigger, more complex infrastructure project. And I think this is the key problem. You're right in saying, you know, we will need hardware, software, and the people. I think the technology solutions can come very fast, but I think these hardware solutions, we will need them as well. And I think it will be the hardest nut to crack how to actually accelerate those hardware solutions, because they do take longer. I think for me, that's one of the sort of key messages coming out of that.
Thank you. Hardware solutions. You mentioned people as well. Walburga, what stood out for you, to you from this report, or what did you want to emphasize?
Just because Joachim ended with the hardware solutions and how hard there are. So maybe first of all, you know, there is no sustainable future without the grid, and we need to tackle all of these. But as you were mentioning, the hardware solutions, I think what's standing out in the report is that there's also a lot of things that we can do on the software or on flexibility more generally. Yeah? And this is also one of the things that we are highlighting in the report, that there's huge flexibility options out there, that we need to seize all the different options, not just looking at local flexibility markets, but also looking at the contribution that energy sharing can bring, a time of use tariffs, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of opportunities out there, but they just need to be grasped. They need to be assessed, first of all. So we're very happy also, for example, to see that in the market design directive, there is some provisions asking member states to assess flexibility options, but then we need also to take the next steps. We need also to implement it and need DSOs, TSOs to take it up.
Thank you, Walburga. Kristian, your reaction, perhaps also I'm going to add the question, what do DSOs need to be able to take this up? And you know, you've also mentioned the cultural shift. How is that going to happen?
Well, I think it's important to underline that the cultural shift is one that's ongoing in companies, but it's also very much one that needs to happen with the regulators. Regulators have been used to seeing the electricity system as a steady state system. You could do what you used to do, what you did for the last 10 years, in the next 10 years to ensure security of supply. As we discussed, security of supply is under rapid change, and electricity is becoming the key to security of supply in a completely different way. So we need to see a mindset change with the regulators as well, in the way they allow for investments, incentivize investments, and allow companies to anticipate what they know are coming. And there is a tendency, in my view, at least when I talk to some regulators, to insist that everything will continue to be, let's say, quite micromanaged, managed top-down from the regulator. This cannot be the case if you are in a reality where scores of developers are asking you to connect solar projects, scores of charge point operators are asking you to connect as well. You need a certain agility, a certain room for maneuver that is not there today, and that needs to be inscribed in the regulation of in the regulatory paradigm.
Thanks. Yeah, from steady state to more dynamic state, and I think that also changes how, at the moment, how we assess risk and how system operators, I think, assess risk. I think is a really important cultural shift. Joachim, we had a high-level grids event early September, hosted by the Commission, I think, in collaboration with NCE and EDSO. What does the Commission, and there will be a follow-up action plan, what is the Commission thinking about in particular in relation to distribution grids and flexibility and speeding up connection?
Yeah, thanks a lot. And I think, first of all, one important message which came out of that event, but I think which is also, I mean, the message of this event, I think, is that, I mean, there is an increased political attention to the necessity to build the grids that connect the renewables. I mean, this is not new as by way of a sort of intellectual discovery, but I think it's something which tends to take a bit second, let's say, priority in terms of the political attention. And I think in that sense, it's very important that this very high-level conference organized by NSOE and the DSO entity with our commissioner put that up front, because we need this attention, and we need this attention to both levels, I mean, to the transmission level and the distribution level. And I think also the fact that we are discussing the distribution level now here in Brussels in a dedicated event is perhaps something which is a bit noteworthy, given that obviously our natural focus in Brussels is more sort of on the cross-border aspects. So I think this political attention as such is very important, given the enormous investment needs that you reiterated as well. Now, as you say, I mean, the commissioner announced, and I think the executive vice president confirmed in his submission to the parliament that we will come forward with an action plan on grid specifically still this year. Now, Obviously, at this point in time, I cannot tell you exactly what the content will be, but I think I would like to make perhaps 3 points by way of the main takeaways, I would say, from this conference that I think will certainly be part of our reflections. And the first one comes back to what I think Kristian said, which is on the role of the regulators and the regulatory framework. So clearly, if we want these investments to go forward into these assets which are regulated, it is key that the regulatory framework allows such investments. And I think the 2 keywords which are mentioned here most often are, on the one hand, the anticipatory investment, and I'm sure we'll go more into that. And on the other hand, let's say the question of let's say CapEx versus OpEx, and the how to incentivize basically investments in efficiency of the grids. And I think these are very important. For these, it is very important that the negotiations on the electricity market design are successfully concluded, as Mrs. Carvalho said. So we also hope very much that we'll make an important step on that next week in the Council. But secondly, it's also, and I think Mrs. Carvalho said it as well, to a large extent about implementation of the framework that we have already in place, and which is certainly not complete at this point in time. We are working on this implementation on many fronts, amongst other things in the Copenhagen Forum, where I think some of you also have been present, and where we try to bring together regulators, DSOs and stakeholders to try and find, let's say, good examples of how to implement these regulatory incentives. So regulation is the first one. The second one is permitting. I do have to come back to that. And Kerstin, Jorna mentioned a couple of important elements on how to accelerate permitting, which are in the Net Zero Industry Act. Quite a few of them actually mirror what we have in the 10E regulation on the acceleration of grids. But when I say grids, this is a bit too general because it's mainly on PCIs. So we fully recognize that while this is, again, obviously our natural focus, it's in and of itself not sufficient. So we need to ensure that member states accelerate permitting procedures, not only for PCIs, but way beyond. We also have the emergency regulation, which covers grids to a certain extent, which will then be sort of continued through the RED III. But again, these provisions have to be fully implemented. And last point, very shortly, there is of course also a financing challenge. Our financial firepower is limited, but it's still important, I would hope. Through the 10E regulation and the Connecting Europe facility, we are able to promote and also financially support some selected projects, including also projects on the distribution level through the smart electricity grid category, which we've actually done in some cases. So some very substantive grants have actually gone to smart electricity grid projects. So I think these are 3 dimensions that we certainly intend to work further on in the Grid Action Plan, and I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you very much. Certainly interesting, and I'm sure it's going to provoke loads of reactions. A flag. I'm going to ask a few more questions, but we're soon going to come to the audience. So if you want to already indicate that you've got a question, I'll keep track of that. But Sean, first, you're from Ireland. I know Ireland is one of the few countries already looking at flexibility and non-thermal flexibility and trying to do an assessment, but also you've been involved in shaping the agenda via the European Parliament on energy over the last few years. What's next? Where do you see the big missing pieces?
I think what we have seen over the last number of years is basically trying to get legislation passed that sets targets. And in fairness to the Commission, they have done that, but now I'm very pleased to hear them talking about action plans, because targets are fine, but you have to have practical action plans. And I note, particularly in the last 6 months or so forth, there's more of a note of caution, but also practicality. What can we do? How can we do it? How can we get stakeholders on board with us? Because not only did we set the targets, which are almost completed now, But also, I think in fairness, in doing that, we have created the awareness. And even if you look at the attendance here today, it's huge for an event like this. I was at what we call the Ploughing Championships in Ireland a few weeks ago, where there would be 100,000 people attending approximately every day. And then there would be various stands. One of them was Solar Energy Ireland. And when I went to them, they couldn't believe the amount of interest from farmers and non-farmers in solar PV. So I think we have created, in fairness to the Commission and the work, we have now created the appetite for progress. Now we must implement it. And I would expect, exactly as you said, the next Commission is about action plans, not setting more targets. We have enough targets now at this stage. When we meet them by 2030, then we might be able to improve. But the whole areas where there are difficulties, pointed out in relation to the grid, permitting is been my bonnet for some time. I've been talking about it. I was successful in getting the Renewable Energy Directive to include it in the proposals, and it has to happen. That there has to be a time limit for public goods or public property goods in relation to these aspects if we are to make progress. That is one of the big problems we have in Ireland. Delay, delay, delay. Too much bureaucracy. That is going to be a huge problem, but at least we're aware of it, and I think we can deal with it. One other thing which I was very pleased about in Ireland, we used to have actually to have planning permission to put a solar panel on a private house. Crazy stuff. Thankfully, the government have got rid of that. So more of that needs to happen. Just say, where are the obstacles? Are these obstacles necessary? Let's reduce them. Make sure that self-consumption is facilitated, because that was a key aspect of the renewable energy file in the last mandate when I was the rapporteur for it. I think the appetite is there. And then, of course, we must ensure that we have, first of all, the raw materials, and secondly, the personnel. That whole question of skills, encouraging people into the industry, we reckon we can have 1 million more jobs or more in this area alone, but we must make sure that people are encouraged and it must be profitable for them. And that's the real challenge, I see. Action, action, action.
I like that. Thank you, Sean. And it also, I mean, from this discussion so far, it strikes me that what's happening now is that it's no longer just about energy decision making. It has implications for, like you said, people's skills. So we need to talk about those who design policies, education, scale up supply chains on that, scale up the supply chains more broadly. So I wonder, perhaps for both of you, Walburga and Kristian, have you seen any good practice in member states or across Europe or even from elsewhere where you say this integration has worked particularly well and that has helped to really unleash the potential and cut down those timelines that look so tricky?
I mean, on the permitting side, yes, there's some member states that are moving, but more generally on the integration of renewables, there are some best practice examples. And I couldn't agree more with you, Jean, that it's really about implementation, because a lot of the things have been decided or are about to be decided with the Market Design Directive. So it's really about getting it on the ground. Where we see things moving already on the flexibility side, for example, is on hybrid projects. There are some front runners, which we see in some member states. We see France, we see Portugal, for example, also on energy sharing. Energy sharing is something where the grids can be supported when you're able to share your electricity on the roof. And we have a super nice example of a kindergarten, for example, in Portugal, where the electricity that is not needed is shared with vulnerable customers, linking to what has also been said, you know, we need to take everyone along. So there are some nice best practice examples, but what it needs in the end is a big plan. And if we call it action plan, all the better, because there's still a couple of things which need to be changed. And one of that is that we need to have a different governance. You were mentioning, Kristian, that we need a shift of mindset, and this is exactly what we need on the governance side. We need to involve all the stakeholders, because otherwise, if only a few are planning the big things that need to happen in the future, we will not get to the best possible results. This cooperation here, I think, shows that if we're working together, we can get to very nice results. And then we need to monitor, show the best practices you were mentioning, and encourage others to do the same, but have very clear KPIs. The European semester, for example, would be a good opportunity to look at the development of the grid, and particularly also when it comes to distribution grids, because 70% of the renewables will be connected to the distribution grid. So apart from that planning and the shift in governance in planning, Kerstin, Jorna mentioned that we cannot afford to waste energy, and this is one of the big problems that we need to solve, curtailment and negative prices. And again, I'm coming back to flexibility. There's so many solutions out there. We just need to make sure that they can be grasped and can be integrated. Hybridization, I mentioned it, that is when you're combining solar and wind, solar and storage. There's a couple of nice examples already out there. Iberdrola in the Spanish market has just recently been issuing the first big hybridization project. So all of that can help, all kinds of flexibilities and not just local flexibility markets. And the last point I want to mention, because I think it's also very important, is that we need to have clear rules. We're discussing a lot about network codes at the moment in different areas. What we see on the distribution grid is that still in different member states, there's many different rules. And just to give you that one example, inverter companies, and some are here today, they're producing different inverters kind of for different member states. And this is not efficient at all. So coming back also to the points that Kerstin, Jorna mentioned, if we want to really get our industry, support our industry, and make sure our industry can thrive, that we have in Europe, that's 35,000 jobs, by the way, we need to have more harmonized rules, and at the same time not ask too much, because there's some discussions we also see where there is a requirement being asked from components that they need to deliver, which might be a little bit too forward going, where we don't have the solutions yet. So we need to have a little bit more time to adapt to that. So clear rules, flexibility solutions, and the right governance involving all stakeholders and monitoring progress.
So best practices from specific member states. We brought out a report recently, the grid capacity report, where we actually showcase a number of these good practices, examples of what individual countries are doing, and there are some interesting cases in there. When it comes to the mere deployment, I stumbled on a figure recently that Poland actually had some 6 gigawatts of solar installed, which is quite impressive. So you can really see that all over the place, the deployment is taking off, which is good news. Coming to the foresight and the anticipation, we had a case from Ireland where they had a concept called Build for 2040. So not just whatever comes up next, but really taking the long view, which helps, let's say, build the infrastructure for what we know is coming when it comes to electrification of the transport and heating and so on and so forth. So that's one good example. Then we see in a number of countries that DSOs actually publish spontaneously on own initiative capacity maps, which allow solar developers to know, okay, so where is it actually possible to connect? That's another good practice, I would say. And perhaps the last example is from Italy, where they've been experimenting with local flexibility markets, which was mentioned as one of the things that can help ease congestions. So yeah, here's a couple of examples, and much more to be read in our capacity report, which came out recently.
Thank you, and really interesting to hear. Also think about how we create that next generation of system operators that's ready for 24/7 all year round renewables on the system. And I think the EU can play a big role in supporting and incentivizing that. I've promised you questions for a very long time, I'm aware. I can see you on, just checking, okay, 2, 3. What I would suggest is, because we don't have that much time, that we try and just bundle them up, and please take notes of the questions. Ideally, very quickly introduce yourself, keep it short. Let me know if it's for someone in particular. Bruce at the front, and then we go to you.
Thanks a lot, Lisa. Bruce Douglas from the Global Renewables Alliance. Just a comment on, Joachim referenced it, it's just so great to see the collaboration between SolarPower Europe and Eurelectric. By coincidence, I've worked for both those two organizations. So even more personally satisfying to see this powerful collaboration. Also, just so inspirational to hear policymakers saying action, action, action. Both MEP Kelly, but Sean, yourself, but also MEP Carvalho, highlighting implementation as now the key. We do not need more legislation, we need action. We call it double down, triple up on renewables, but the action plan that Walburga mentioned would be critical. So the question is to Walburga and to Kristian, the 5 key recommendations, and in fact, I see them relevant for renewables generally, and also for all global markets. So it's really a great piece of work that we're going to use. I'm assuming it's in priority order, but the question to you is, what is your number 1 and why?
I'm going to collect questions if that's okay. There was one there. Also, we have loads of women in the room, so also do raise your hand. One question over there, and then go down.
All right. Hi, everyone. Otto Laird from 10AO. There's been a lot of conversation on permitting today, but also in the context of the Renewable Energy Directive and the increase in production capacity. But on the renewables conversation, we've also had a lot of discussion about public opinion. So I wanted to ask the panelists, how do you think we can get local buy-in in addition to permitting processes to make sure that the transition takes place and happens?
Thank you. And then there was a question at the front.
Yes, hello, Alexander Kenneck, Enphase Energy, an inverter manufacturer. Thank you so much to Eurelectric and SolarPower Europe for putting this together. It's a great effort, very much appreciated. Thank you also to the European Parliament and the Commission that are present, and the question is directed especially to the European Commission. So we all see in the room that many gigawatts of PV projects at all voltage levels are currently not realized because of a lack of grid capacity. We can all agree that there needs to be more investments, there is no doubt about it. But as industry, we already provide smart solutions, smart technology for generators, for prosumers, to actually limit the import and export of electricity to and from the grid, meaning we can enable the prosumers to behave according to the wishes of the DSOs and thus safeguarding the grid. So we are very excited and very happy to see this kind of approach and concept taken up by Parliament in the position on the electricity market design in the form of flexible agreements, flexible connection agreements. And we hope that they will prevail in the trilogue negotiations, and it would be very interesting to hear the Commission's point of view regarding this kind of concept and the likelihood of being successful in the trilogue negotiations. Thank you.
Thank you. I've had 2 more hands, which I'm going to take, and then I'm going to go back to the panel. So one over here and one over there. Go for it.
Hello, I'm Jacques de Kegel, Swap to Drive e-mobility, but I have a few questions, and I will just go rapidly through it.
Can you keep it to 2, just because of the quantity? Thank you.
Yeah. Well, first of all, when I look at the television, for instance, to the Giro d'Italia or the Vuelta, I see very little solar panels on the rooftops on these very nice roofs in Italy, in Spain, where there is plenty of solar capacity available. So I'm just wondering, as an observer, how does it come that there are so few in the south of Europe? The second one, in Belgium, for instance, and now I'm speaking specifically for Belgium, I don't know the situation in other countries, but you see that people invest, let's say, just the panels they need for their own needs, because the injection tariffs are so ridiculously low. So, for instance, you have a rooftop of, say, 50 square meters, you only install 10 square meters, and the other 40 are available but are not used. So maybe there also there is an opportunity for, let's say, grow the capacity. And in general, I've made myself a little, let's say, study, but it's confirmed by Energyville in Belgium, is that when we take all the surface of the rooftops in Belgium, we can sum up around 80 terawatt hours, which is about the consumption in Belgium. So we, in fact, we even don't need wind turbines. We can do it with our PV panels if we have, let's say, a very good strategy towards it.
Thank you. There was one more question over here.
Thank you. I'm Vasiliki Clonari, representing Wind Europe. Yeah.
Just a bit louder, thanks.
Vasiliki Clonari, representing Wind Europe. I'm the head of energy system integration. So I have a question about anticipatory investments. In the current regulatory framework, it is actually already, it doesn't stop countries or system operators from making anticipatory investments. So now, in terms of actions and the EU action plan on grids, it is really important to make sure that this action plan mandates and monitors whether these anticipatory investments can deliver what is planned with the national energy and climate plans of each country. So my question to the panel is, who do you think should be this authority or organization that should be mandating this and monitoring whether it's implemented?
Thank you. The governance question. Good. I'm going to return to the panel now. Hopefully everyone's taken notes, but fantastic. So we had one question, I think. I'm not going to take them in order. I'm going to just start with one. Sean, I think I'm going to direct that to you on public opinion. I'm obviously going to open it to the wider panel, but I think public opinion also the sort of social aspects of this. What's your take?
I think it's a very good question and it's very important. I don't think public buy-in is going to be as big a problem in the future as it has been in the past. And I think if you communicate properly, that will make a big difference. So any projects we have must be properly communicated at local level to get buy-in and show the benefits for the area. Also, on an individual basis, we have apps on our phones. One of them is how far we walk every day, how many steps. I think we should be looking at some kind of an app where people's carbon footprint could be shown as well and give them a target to reduce it. Because you get buy-in from people on a kind of a personal, emotional level, as well as on a broader level. And as well as that, when I see renewable energy projects being shot down for planning permission, there has to be some accountability for that. First of all, it has to be clear that public policy is in favour of renewables, and you have to justify why you didn't do it. And secondly, I would like to have sectional targets or regional targets for authorities who have the power to reject renewable energy projects, be it solar farms, which I saw rejected in my own area recently, that they have to reach targets as well. So that if they reject one, they're compelled to reach a target, and at the end of the year or a couple of years, they'll be fined if they don't do it. Because it's too easy to take the loudest voice, creating havoc, suggesting that all sort of damage is going to be done to the environment, when in actual fact, it is the opposite. All the renewable projects are trying to reduce emissions. So I think we need to communicate that. And then on the broader front, I think the next Commission in particular, monitoring is going to be a key part of their work. To see are countries on target to meet whatever targets they have been set on an annual basis, and then also perhaps make comparisons between member states to see how one is doing well, how another isn't doing well. Tell the one that isn't doing well, you better up your game. And then that the member state itself would do the same within its own jurisdiction for regions and create a certain amount of competition as well, one doing better than the next. And I think we can get buy-in, because I just feel, as I said initially, I feel the appetite is there now for people to both make a contribution themselves individually in reducing their carbon emissions, to be more efficient in terms of the use of energy, but also to see their community being part of it. And we need to tap into that and make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. I'm going to turn to you, Joachim. You might have reactions on that, what Sean just said around more direct engagement of the EU with the regional level, which I think is very interesting, and it's definitely a challenge coming towards us, and that we need to think about. But there were some questions directed at you on flexible connection agreements. There was one also on who should be monitoring progress on anticipatory investments. So over to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I do want to just make a short comment also indeed on the question of public acceptance, sitting next to Sean Kelly, because I mean, that is a very important issue in particular also for grids. And we have worked with DSOs in particular over many years in order to see what works to enhance, let's say, public acceptance for overhead lines, which is again probably one of the trickiest things to do. And we actually have a reward that we give on this account, and it's gone a couple of times to AirGrid. And I think the key thing that they have come to do in a very good way is to start engagement with the public at a very early stage, basically at the stage when you draw up your plans and concepts, so that the public actually understands why you have to build, a certain overhead line before you actually come to saying, it will be in that corridor. So it is really about starting this dialogue at an early point in time. And I mean, it is also quite simply about the human factor to lead this dialogue in a way which comes across as genuine. I think this can be done, but again, it requires the investment of a lot of time into these public dialogues. But if it's not done, then people tend to go to court in the end, and it takes longer. So it is quite important. Just very briefly on the two other questions now, without wanting to preempt sort of what position they're going to take in the EMD negotiations on individual amendment proposals. I think what I can say is that obviously our interest is I think the same as everybody's here on the table to reduce these queues, let's say, in terms of connection requests. And for this, I think we need to on the one hand, of course, continue to push for the grid build out, which I mentioned in the beginning, but at the same time, of course, to use all the solutions in terms of smartness, but also in terms of, let's say, flexibility, which will help to, let's say, to bring more generators on stream before this build out of the hardware that I mentioned in the beginning is there. So certainly, I mean, we're interested in this kind of solutions, and I'm sure we'll find a good, or the colleagues who are negotiating the package will find a good solution on that point as well. Now, anticipatory investment. I think I agree with you that it's not at all forbidden. So I mean, it's of course possible under the current framework, and it's even explicitly mentioned in the EMD proposals that we've made. I think it's to a large extent about. I mean, there's of course a clear responsibility in this whole discussion for the regulators. Let's be clear, because I mean they have to accept the investments, and meaning that they have to accept that consumers have to pay for it. So there is a question of sort of how much risk can be taken, and there is I think also a certain role for the public authorities in let's say conveying the message that a certain grid build out will be in line with certain let's say with certain decarbonization and renewable objectives that we've put ourselves. Which can help in this discussion, which can hopefully also help the regulators We're discussing solar today, but I just want to mention in passing, as you are aware, that in the offshore sector, we now have the offshore network development plans, which are sort of medium to long-term perspective, which are precisely supposed to translate renewables, in this case an offshore wind ambition, into needs for the grid. And I think we need to find the right mechanisms that will allow all actors, let's say, to take their responsibility and allow these anticipatory investments to go forward.
Thank you. And I think it's actually mentioned in the report. It's also interesting to think about Germany has 800 DSOs. What's the set of assumptions they're using, and how do we even streamline that in terms of the build out? Because at the moment, we don't even have the plans to do the anticipatory planning from. So that's I think, really important. Now, finally, to both of you, you can obviously comment on the other questions as well, but we had the question from Bruce, we had the question on what's going in Italy, why don't we see more houses with solar? Why don't we see in Belgium more investment also in rooftop solar? So over to you both.
Thanks. So maybe first to comment still quickly on what you said, Jean. I very much like your idea of competition. And I think it hasn't been trickling down enough yet that we are really talking about whether Europe will have a competitive advantage in the future or not. It is really about whether we have enough renewables or not. China, just to give you one figure, is going to very likely build 200 gigawatt of solar this year. That is as much as we have installed, more or less. We have a little bit more, but more or less as much as we have installed in Europe today, the total capacity. So it's clear that this is a competitive race we're in. Who is building renewables the fastest? And if we can have I like your idea of an app and of competition between regions. If we can take that down to the regional level, to households, all the better. But I think this mindset needs to be sharpened, that we're talking about competitiveness of Europe. Just to start with, then Bruce, your question, what is the number one? They are obviously all equally important, but if you would ask me how we could book the fastest results, that would for me very clearly be flexibility, because there's a lot of flexibility assets already out there which can be used, where member states can incentivize using them. I mentioned them, you can have time of use tariffs, firm grid connections, hybrid projects, local flexibility markets, energy sharing. So you have a whole bundle of flexibility possibilities, and if we would use them very quickly, it would already have a very fast impact. Then local buy-in. I do think more and more we need to look into sharing the benefits clearly with local communities. There's great examples of projects which are already doing that. We have been putting them in the spotlight in one of our reports, really showing how you can locally create jobs, how you can bring benefits when it comes to biodiversity, when it comes to financial benefits to local communities. And so I think these are the best practices which need to be rolled out much more. And energy sharing is part of it, because this is how you bring, and that was also linking a little bit to your question, why don't we use our roofs much more than just for the single use. So this is how we can really bring the benefits also to vulnerable customers, to share the energy that is produced on one roof, but the full roof with neighbors, with others who might not have a roof, or who have difficulties in installing. So I do think, and it's great to see that in the Market Design Directive. So this is the way forward. This is the next step of prosumers. Why do we still have these little roofs? That's what we're going to change at the moment, hopefully, with the EPBD, with the solar roof mandate. So in the future, the space that we already have and that we're not using, like roofs, like parking lots and others, should be used indeed. And this is should be enshrined in the EPBD. And yes, I think I answered your question already, why, only for the owners. I think this should not be the future anymore. We should use the space. And I agree with you, there's a huge potential. A very conservative numbers say that we can power 25% of the electricity consumption in Europe with roofs only. And this is super conservative. So there's a huge potential, but we also need our wind colleagues because this is how we can create the 24/7 renewables that we all need. So we need these hybrid projects and we need to go forward all together. And maybe one last thing on the governance. Sorry, Kristian. So yes, what we absolutely need is political oversight. So we need to, first of all, draw the right plans. That's what you mentioned. Draw up the right plans, look into also renewable scenarios, which is missing very often still. We need to involve all stakeholders to get the plans that are anticipatory and where we get all views in it. And then we need to have political oversight and pushing for what has been agreed in the end.
Starting with Bruce's question, I would probably opt for the anticipatory investments piece and the general foresight because this is the one that we can actually change now with the market reform. So it is important to get that market reform done. I would add that we should really combine this anticipatory investment clause with positive incentives for grid operators to do so. And maybe that would be a good segue to come to Wind Europe's question of what about, who should monitor this. I think it is definitely not sufficiently reflected in the current legislation and definitely not sufficiently incentivized in the current legislation to take an anticipatory approach. And this is why we're so adamant on pushing it. Indeed, we see the opposite many places, an outright ban on building until you receive the connection request. So this exists. So we need to unlock that. And I would also add, we definitely need wind, and according to all our scenarios, we need wind. And by the way, all types of other renewables and then some in order to power a fully or a much more electrified world. So I'd like to just end on the question on that buy-in, because it's a special theme. There's definitely a buy-in question related to renewables, but there's also very much one related to grid infrastructure. And again, I think it was really a key theme at the high-level grid event. What about those benefits? The characteristic of an interconnector is that it passes through somewhere, but it's actually not the people living right next to it that get the benefits. So perhaps even more than in relation to renewable projects, or at least as much, we have those challenges of the local people feeling the impact, also seeing the benefit. So how to address that's going to be a key part of getting the necessary grid investments flowing. We see very good examples, as mentioned by Walburga, in the space of renewables with co-ownership, opt-in of local communities. For instance, in Italy, projects planned and executed by, for instance, Enel. But when it comes to creating those broader, let's say, local benefits and societal benefits, I would add, I'd point you to one of our recent reports called Power Plant, where we look into how you can create recreative benefits, recreative spaces in relation to, for instance, grid projects. There's one interesting one from E.ON where they decided to try to create 50,000 football fields of biodiversity under their grid lines. So here's an example of how to, let's say, make infrastructure investments go hand in hand with biodiversity. There's another fun case from Finland where they actually plan ski slopes, cross-border ski slopes under the grid lines because, well, they need to do the O&M anyway, so why not combine it with something that provides recreative opportunity for people in the local area. So it's that kind of synergistic thinking that we need to get into to get people to accept this, and the monetary aspect is also important to get the buy-in.
Thank you. We need to close in a second, and before I give the last word to Walburga, first of all, Thanks to the panel. Thanks for everyone contributing by questions. I know we didn't get to all of them, and that's partly my moderation challenge. Thank you to everyone who's been involved in preparing this event. Just very quickly from what I've heard, I think there's two really, really big buckets. One is a real fast action bucket because we have all that solar waiting. We have that demand, but we also have a lot of challenges. So we need to stabilize the environment and make sure we can actually connect and build. But there's also the flexibility piece. And I feel like maybe we should rename the grid action plan, the flexible grid action plan to really anchor that strongly. And then there is the longer term piece around strategic planning and monitoring. That's a lot about shifting institutional culture around governance, around monitoring, around shifting how we think about risk. I think I just want to highlight, we also had some good big ideas, like making space on rooftops a collective resource, like thinking through races to the top on regions and system operator levels. So let's take them with us and feed them into the forward process. But thank you again, and over to you, Walburga.
Thanks a lot. So I think I can also just summarize the discussions, but let me first start with a sincere thank you again to you, Kristian, and to your whole team, and to my team, which have done a fantastic job in issuing this report through the discussions in 3 roundtables. I'm happy to see that indeed this was very much needed also from the political side to bring these ideas together on the transmission side. Because indeed, as I mentioned already, there is no future for Europe without an upgraded, no sustainable future for Europe without an upgraded grid, and in particular without an upgraded distribution grid. So let me maybe just quickly summarize my thoughts once again. Flexibility indeed is one of the key things that I've already mentioned. So I'm going to be very short here because I've been putting a lot of emphasis on that already. The review of the governance beyond interconnections, you also summarized it very well, Lisa, is key. So we need to make sure that the governance is the right one in order to tackle the issues that we have ahead. And that also goes together with an accelerated investment. And I very much liked, Joachim, that you were mentioning that the CEF could also be potentially opened to more investments into distribution grid. Maybe one other thing you could think about is human resources, because in the end, a lot is about human resources, whether we are talking about delays, whether we're talking about digitalizing the grid. It needs experts. So all these things need a lot of human resources, jobs. And we could also think about investing and using some of the money to building up those capacities. The modernization of the grid indeed is one of the key topics. We are also looking at. Digitalization is a buzzword, and the people that I already mentioned. And then very important, we can only be successful if we're all working together, and if we are gathering all the views of the main stakeholders. That will also be key in the governance going ahead. And again, the outcome of this project is showing that the best possible results can be achieved if everyone is working together. Again, I would like to reiterate this idea of using the European semester for monitoring progress that we hopefully are booking very soon on grids, and to really have this competitive race that you were mentioning, and using the European semester for it, showcasing who is the fastest and where are the best practice examples that everyone can follow. Very much looking forward to future cooperations, and I would like to thank you all for joining us here today. Thanks a lot.